Okay guys, so I know sometimes in these videos I can come off as kind of an old head or a hater if you will, someone who really only likes the old scene and the OG SoundCloud rappers from back in the day, and a lot of people have accused me of being a gatekeeper with this whole new generation, especially with all the upcoming white kids, which I do understand where you would get that impression if you watch my Netspam video. But today I want to push back against that narrative just a little bit by putting a spotlight on two new upcoming rappers going by the name Edward Skeletrix and Brennan Jones. Now you may have heard of them before considering their very strange artists that have been gaining a lot of traction in the new wave for some not so great reasons, more so Brennan, but before I get to that I do want to cover Edward first, because in my opinion he is a lot more interesting of lore where Brennan is a whole lot more controversial. But for those of you who do know Edward, you know he goes under a bunch of different names, the first being Edward Kingbase IV, or by his actual government name Edward Kyle, with him also dabbling in multiple different genres including rap, producing, and of course fashion, which is primarily where he got a lot of his fame. Now like usual, I'd like to talk about his early life and take a look into his upbringing, but unfortunately there's not a whole lot of information about that. The only thing that we know is that he was born in Florida at sometime during 1998. His entire home life, school life, and family is completely unknown, and that's most likely for a good reason, because after all, once you start to get famous, weirdos like me like to search into your past and find out more about you. But as of right now, we don't know anything about his early life, so we have to start in 2014 when he ended up producing a track for the late great XXXTentacion. This track is known as Elegant and unfortunately has never been released in any commercial form. Apparently it was up on SoundCloud at one point but was later deleted. There is still one random studio snippet that's still up on YouTube at this point, which I'll show you right here.
40 in that thing with the yayo, H-U-B, Flocka, Chopper, pull up like a doctor.
But unfortunately, it seems like X's estate has no plans to officially release this track anytime soon, leaving a lot of his 2014 catalog behind, most likely due to the fact that it was all pretty poorly recorded and not that well mixed, but I feel like they could turn it into something special if they really wanted to. But besides just being a producer, Sight would actually start to rap as well, creating his first mixtape sometime during 2014 called Architecture, which funnily enough was actually created when he was studying to be an architect. It says on Genius that he studied at Georgia State, and there's also rumors online that he was studying to be a psychologist as well, but there's not as much proof of that. But either way, he seems to be different than your average rapper who ends up dropping out of high school and then going on to only make music in the following years. He had different interests, and this mixtape is also very interesting at the same time because it has a feature from Night Lovell, an artist that you already know went on to become huge in the underground scene in the following years. I'm not sure exactly how they met, but it was most likely because Sight produced a track for Night Lovell and then he decided to pay the favor back by hopping on his first project. But besides that one really notable feature, basically everybody else on the project is a no-name, all hailing from the same group known as 0% Boys, which unfortunately I can't find a whole lot of information about online. All we know is that Sight would join them at some point before then leaving in the following year. And the only reason that we know he was a member of that group is because he has multiple tracks alongside them, all posted on a YouTube channel known as Sceneline Land, I believe that's how you say it, which has basically all of his music archived, including his next mixtape known as Celestial, which overall is pretty unnotable with no features to draw your attention, so we'll move on to his next persona, Shieldless. Although before we get to that, I do have to mention there was quite a gap between the time that he stopped producing under the name Sight and started rapping under the name Shieldless, about 2 years, but even though he wasn't rapping or producing during that period, he would find another creative outlet by starting up a clothing brand known as Sicily, which is a pretty successful brand which includes a bunch of different bags and t-shirts with a similar design of a troll face with sharp teeth, and on top of that, this is also when he would create his infamous character known as Hubert Skeletrix, who apparently is a fat bald white man who is also dead, with Edward making sure to pay respects to the fallen legend by selling a picture of him for only $21, which is very generous of him for giving away such a sacred relic for such a cheap price, but at the same time, because he gave it away for so cheap, it's now completely sold out, so if any of you had dreams of owning this at one point, it's over now, I'm sorry. But that only goes to show just how successful this clothing brand was becoming, but even with everything going well on that front, it seems like the call of music was too strong for him to stay away from, and this is when he would return under the new alias, Shieldless. It's possible this name was made in reference to the rap collective started up by Blade called Gravity Boys Shield Gang, but there's no way to tell for sure. But besides the name change, everything else was the same, with him continuing to produce and rap throughout the year 2017 before once again putting it down and going back to his clothing brand. Most of the tracks that he made under this new alias are still posted on that very same YouTube channel, so if you want to check them out, you definitely can, but to me, they sound almost the same as the stuff that he made under the Sight name. with the 2010s coming to an end, everything would once again change for Edward because he would return to music under his third and final alias, Edward Skeletrix. But this name change would be a lot more notable than the last because it came alongside a new project on TikTok known as Skeletrix Island. Now, explaining exactly what this is pretty difficult because after all it's art and you can't really describe art to somebody, but if I were to give you a quick summary, it's basically what would happen if we put AI in the wrong hands, or depending where you stand in life, possibly the right hands, because he would show a bunch of different AI abominations and different uncanny scenarios, with the most popular one being a video of a guy getting a mask taken off of his face that has a bunch of skulls and different stuff going on there. I can't fully explain it, so I'll have to show it to you. And besides his original creations, he would also take other people's TikTok and put the AI filter over them too, adding weird sound effects, which of course caught a lot of attention. And as soon as this project had a big enough fan base, he would completely turn it around by adding his own original music into the background, leading many people to ask, what is this unsettling music going alongside this unsettling video? With the primary track that he would use for these videos being called Skeletrix Island, which of course would become so popular that he would then put out a second installment, followed up by a third one, and then finally released an entire mixtape called Skeletrix Language, which in my opinion is a project that everybody should listen to at least once. It's so experimental and different than anything else going on in modern hip-hop that you might not immediately like it, but if you give it enough of a try, I think it will grow on you. And of course this mixtape would also include Skeletrix Island number 4, and this album included 10 tracks called Typical Rap Song, even though they're anything but. And after dropping that project, he would immediately start to drop music videos on YouTube as well, incorporating that weird AI horror from before, as well as different visual effects, helping to gain him a fan base on both YouTube and Spotify, with people initially being drawn in by the weird visuals but sticking around for the very unique music. And it's a good thing that he managed to build a fan base on these other platforms, because in late 2023 his TikTok account actually ended up getting taken down. Some people think he took it down himself and other people think he got banned, but there's no way to say for sure. I know I've been saying that a lot during this video, but it really is hard to dig up lore on this guy because I think he keeps himself intentionally cryptid so people never know his next move. But unlike your average Cardi clone who tries to hide their face and stay behind the scenes, he actually has a method to his madness and a reason to be so mysterious, which is obviously working for him, because he now sits at over 68,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, as well as having many big songs including Zog, Blurry Pictures, and Fun, which only came out recently but is already doing numbers. And it seems like Edward's gonna have a very long career in the underground. But now that we talked about him and his whole come up, it's important to also mention his partner in crime, Brennan Jones. And surprisingly, there's even less to say about his upbringing than Edward. We basically know nothing about his childhood or where he came from, with the first time he even appeared online being an Instagram account where he would post his fit pics, which didn't gain any traction whatsoever, but apparently he was so passionate about fashion that he would eventually become a designer for different rappers in the underground. And of course, with Edward having his own prominent fashion brand, it wasn't long before the two would cross ways and eventually start rapping together. But it's not like Brennan didn't have any prior music or clout before that point, because he would start to post snippets of him dancing around in a gas station online, which just like Netspend would eventually get him some meme potential. It seems like all it takes to blow up in the underground nowadays is posting a snippet online that people find funny enough to share around. That's how Netspend got his start, that's how Ian got his start, and of course that's also how Brennan Jones would initially get some clout. But unlike his contemporaries, things wouldn't be so simple, because as soon as people started to notice him online, they would start calling him a clone. And I'm not talking about a clone like Kid Boo actually cloning himself and trying to get clout off of that whole endeavor. I'm talking about people claiming that he was copying other artists in the underground like Glock 40 Spaz, Dirtball, and of course Laserdym 700. Now I actually have no idea who the first two people are. Of course I've heard of Laserdym before, he's really blowing up right now, but it seems that people think that he sounds similar enough to Brennan Jones that it's a problem. And on top of that, he's also getting hate in the underground for being part of this whole white boy apocalypse that's taking over the underground scene. I mean, we all saw that recent interview where Tyler the Creator called out Ian for supposedly taking advantage of black culture and basically making a joke out of it.
This white kid, regular like Caucasian man, and he's like mocking Future and Gucci Mane like rap music. And like people are like, this shit hard.
And even though that criticism was specifically aimed at Ian, I feel like the same could be said for any upcoming white boy in the underground scene. So that's already 2 strikes for his newly formed career, but if that wasn't bad enough, it turns out he's also a big fan of a very famous Austrian painter from the 1940s, if you know what I mean. Yeah, it turns out this white boy really likes the H-Man, or at least if you're online in any capacity, that's what you would think, but there's a little bit more context to the situation that I feel like you should have. So this all comes from an interview that he did a couple years ago where basically he was approached by an interviewer on the street who asked him what he thought of Kanye West, which right off the bat, in my opinion, is a very stupid question to ask because you're always going to get the same safe answer of people saying, well, I like his music, but I can't support him anymore based off what he said. And it seems like Brennan also found this a very dumb question to ask because he ended up telling the interviewer that he actually liked Kanye only because he fucked with Hitler, which is definitely a big brain move on his part, but at the same time, in this modern era, people aren't going to take that too well.
Should we still be bumping Kanye?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. What's your reason?
Bro, when he said he f***ed with Hitler, that shit was fire.
And immediately people would start talking about it on Twitter, saying that he needed to be canceled and that he shouldn't be making music anymore because he's a neo-Nazi or a Nazi sympathizer, something like that. And just like that, after one bad interview, in fact, not even a full interview, just one clip from an interview, he permanently has a bad name put on his back, and every time he's brought up in discussion, people always equate him to being a Nazi, which is definitely not a good look for an upcoming artist in the underground scene. In fact, it kind of reminds me a little Xan and that whole interview that he did where he supposedly dissed Tupac, and then that ended up blowing up and becoming bigger than everything else he ever did in his career. I mean, even to this day, people talk about him dissing Tupac, so it seems like something that he's never going to be able to shake off. And for Brennan, it's even worse because he's not even on the level of Lil Xan at this point. So it seems like this title is going to become bigger than his entire career, but in my opinion, only if he lets it. I think if he keeps working in Edward and starts creating a bit more of a unique flow that doesn't sound anything like Laserdisc 300 or those other two people, I think the clone allegations will start to fall off and he can eventually get himself away from that title of being a white Nazi. I mean, there's always going to be people online that are going to call him that, but it seems like in the real world he actually has fans because he ended up doing his first ever show in Florida the other night and a lot of people turned out for it. So I think both these boys are going to be just fine, and in my opinion, I don't think it's going to be that out of the question to see them at Rolling Loud next year or maybe even bigger stages than that, because after all, with such a lack of creativity in the modern underground scene, somebody doing something even a little bit unique is sure to stand out. And if nothing else, Edward Skeletrix and Brennan Jones definitely stand out compared to the waves and waves of generic Cardi clones or generic Zilla clones, so I gotta give it to them. And if you haven't checked out their music yet, I definitely would recommend you do so, or if you have checked them out, let me know what you think in the comments below. Also leave a knife emoji, shout out to Knife Gang, shout out to my Patreons, Crusader Official, Liam Campbell, William Collins, and of course Matthew. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel, and with all that said, I'll see you in the next one. Peace out. Bye.